Hi everyone, I hope you are all enjoying great and inspiring talks today. I'm super excited to be part of SoCreative 2021 and thank you Stimos Africa for having me as one of the speakers here today. My name is Martina Mwanza. I originally come from Czech Republic, but I've been living in Zambia for the past 10 years. And 8 years ago, with my colleague Daniel Mwala, we established an organization called Sotambe from Institute, which is a platform that promotes and supports upcoming and established filmmakers from Zambia and Southern African region. The word Sotambe in local language Bemba means come and watch, and we started organization purely as a documentary film and arts festival. You see, I come from the background of being a lecturer in development studies, and so I wanted to use documentary movies in addition to my lecturing to my classes, because documentary movies are based on real life situations, and thought that it's really perfect to start a discussion like that and expand the person's understanding about somebody else's story about the problem that we are discussing. And so, with that in mind, we started the first edition of the festival in 2014, and we screened documentary movies to college and university students, and it was followed up by panel discussions. It was really amazing for us to see how much young people are actually hungry for information and how much they want to discuss and share. And we realized that they probably just don't have a platform where they can do so. So it was really great, but we also realized that the documentary movies we were showing did not have necessary impact that we wanted to have on our audience. And reason was that these documentaries were international ones done by researchers and the documentaries from Europe and America. And even though it was really great to, watch inspiring stories about corruption in China and pollution in Russia and many others, it really did not speak to our audience because the context in which these stories were set was just completely different. And so we started looking for the movies which were much closer culturally and economically and socially to understanding of our audience. And so we started showing African movies, and it was really nice and great. But then again, these movies were done by outsiders. And so I remember in 2015, the second edition of the festival, there was actually one of the students who pointed out to say, why are you showing us movies, about our problems done by outsiders? Why don't you show us, movies about corruption in Zambia done by Zambians so that we can associate with, with it? And I think that was the point when it really hit me. If you want to impact somebody with a story, that story must be one, set from within the local context, and two, must be said by a local person. If there is need for the person to use local language for the deeper understanding of what he's trying to say and then use the subtitles, it's even better. And so that's how, as an organization, we open up our portfolio to submissions from Zambian productions, being a documentary movie, feature film, or a short film, as long as the movie has kind of a social change in it. And I'll talk about it a bit later. But that's what Sotambe is known for, and I think that's what distinguishing us from other film festivals. We're really focusing on showing the movies with social change. And just a bit of a background to a festival, we run every 5 days in September, and the structure of the festival is in the way that during the morning hours we screen documentary movies to college and university students, so they can have discussions about certain topics. And then in the afternoon we screen feature films and the short films, which are followed up by the discussion with the producers and the directors. As I said, we serve as a platform for the upcoming and established filmmakers, and it is really a place where people from Zambia and filmmakers from Zambia and Malawi, Botswana, Zimbabwe, and South Africa, they can meet and they can learn from each other and build themselves up, which is really great. And then in addition to screenings, of course, we run the master classes, we run conferences, and we have a great additional programs of having poetry nights, having art exhibitions in Dama Place. So it is really a place to be, and you are all invited to take part in 8th edition of the festival this September. Some of you might have watched this amazing TED Talk, A Danger of a Single Story, by Nigerian writer Adichie Chimamanda, who actually said that the power of each story lies in who tells the story, what type of story is being told, whether it's positive or negative, and how many times the story is being told. European person like me can never tell an African story because I'll never fully understand the context and the deep meaning of it. And it is regardless of how good researcher I am or how many years I've been living here in Zambia. My version of African story or Zambian story, even though I've been living here, will always be based on my background, my upbringing, all the movies and stories I read as a kid that form my opinions. I will tell the African story from that point of view. And I've been discussing that with my husband, always when, I'm trying to explain to him what I think about this and that. And he tells me, you can never fully understand it because you don't have my background. You've never been through what I've been through. And that makes sense, actually. So the only people who can tell the African stories the way it is are Africans themselves. And so I'm very proud on SoTan being this platform that promotes, voices from Southern African region, and we've screened the content made by South African filmmakers to Southern African audience. As I said before, we focus on the African continent as a large, but then we realize that there's a huge difference between Southern Africa, Western Africa, and Eastern Africa, and we need to respect these differences. But then the question probably would be, why do we have very few African stories told by Africans themselves in a TV, in social media, and the other medias? And I actually put here some few notes for myself because I've been really thinking about it. And for one, I think that the problem is that there are very few platforms that would support African storytellers, being it writers or the filmmakers. International platforms may not necessarily be interested in African content because it will not relate to the viewers, to the audience. I remember that I was trying to make a deal with some of the film festivals in my country, and they said that the African section is so small that it is actually irrelevant for them to screen those movies from Zambia and Southern African region because they know that people won't come and watch them. But it also depends on the nature of each film festival. So I understood it. But then also we have local platforms that should, promote African voices. But there are very few of them. Platforms like SoCreative and SoTambe itself, they are just being formed, and the influence is still pretty much regional. Secondly, for African storytellers to be heard, they are trying to obviously sell their stories. It is long we bypassed the saying that filmmaking is a hobby. In 2017, as a festival, we ran a campaign to say that filmmaking is occupation, and actually, filmmakers themselves should be able to put bread on the table using their crafts. And so, in a way that they try to sell the content to people who are buying the content, which will probably now be international platforms, knowingly or unknowingly, the producers and the writers will always try to adjust that story towards the target audience, meaning who is going to buy it. And so, in the long run, the story loses its authenticity. I remember in 2019 we screened this great feature film done by a Zambian filmmaker. It was about early pregnancies, and it's a great production that won so many international awards. But when we showed it at the festival, the people who watched were quite disappointed. There was a scene where the African mother helped the daughter with the abortion, and unfortunately, the daughter dies out of bleeding, and so the mother starts crying. But the crying, the scene it was done in the movie, the crying was much of a sobbing, like the white person like me would probably cry, not crying of an African mother. And so I realized that the African storytellers are much under pressure of selling their stories to make a living, that they are under pressure of this globalization on, how to portray this story. And this is why so many Zambian movies sound like Nigerian productions, unfortunately. And lastly, point that I wanted to bring out is that local people, unfortunately, do not watch local content. especially when they have to pay for it. It is now, when you might have noticed, across Southern African region, there are all these campaigns, support local, and we are trying to emphasize that it starts from us, African people watching African productions. But are we there yet? This is probably a long journey, and so I'm very happy also for SoCreative and these platforms who are making sure that African voices are being heard. And I hope we have a lot of viewers watching this, because it starts from us. I have mentioned before that as an organization, we are promoting movies with social change. And why did we shift from the use of documentaries into screening feature films and the short films with social change? It's because we have realized that you don't have to be documentaries to have an impact on someone with your story. Basically, every story that is being released into digital space, being it a written one or the movie, has an impact on the person who is watching it or reading it. And so it's up to the storytellers to decide whether they want to impact the viewers positively or negatively. And I think all of us, we should be aware, and we should realize that we are so vulnerable towards what we see. It's incredible how much influence the stories have on us. Um, if you look at the evolution of human beings, how did we learn in the past? We learned based on observation what we saw around us. So the people who were guiding us, guiding our actions, telling us what is right and wrong, were the closest community. The people who were transferring the values onto us were our grandfathers, sharing the stories around the fireplace. And so in the 21st century, with the fourth digital revolution, we should probably ask, who has taken the role of the grandparents, grandfathers, telling us the story and guiding our actions and behavior, and which organizations or which platforms has taken the role of the fireplaces, making sure that we get to hear the right stories and we become better human beings. Every time I'm actually, talking about this, I always remember one of the workshops that I've attended when I was at school, and it was one of those evenings where people shared the experience on the travel from the travels, and this was the evening about South Korea. So we had the people who were been to South Korea, and the person who hired to travel, people who hired to travel, sorry, and there was a person who was sharing the slideshow about his recent trip to South Korea. And after about 50 minutes of him sharing the pictures with us and the stories, the organizers of the evening actually stood up to say that none of the pictures and none of the stories that we had were actually from South Korea. And I tell you that the entire audience froze, because we all now become, alert and awake. How come we haven't questioned? How come we didn't recognize it? Especially people who went to South Korea before. And later in the discussion, they started coming up one by one to say, when I saw this picture, I actually thought that it cannot be South Korea because of the tree cannot grow there. But I haven't said anything. And why none of them questioned or none of them said anything is because we are so vulnerable towards what we see that we are automatically taking it as a reality. And so back to what I said before, who are our teachers, who are our grandfathers, who are guiding us, which stories are ensuring the unity and the positive development, and what values are being promoted in stories that we watch. And I've mentioned before that in the 21st century, with the fourth digital revolution, there's just so much pressure on the storytellers who want to sell their stories that it has become a business, which is good for a local storytellers who can finally make a living out of their passion. But at the same time, because they are looking so much onto selling the story, automatically means that we are losing the authenticity and we are being drawn into the global village set standard of what the story should be about, what people like to watch. And if you look at it nowadays, we are watching movies with bad language. I mean, I cannot watch any of the new productions on Netflix around with my kids, not to mention channels like MTV and others. But what it does ultimately, without us realizing it, that the more we are exposed to such stories, the more we watch them over and over, um, we are taking these things as a reality, as the way it is. So all of a sudden you find yourself that you don't mind somebody speaking bad language, you don't mind poor dress code, because this is the way it is. This kind of impact stories have on us. Um, and I also feel that with the mushrooming streaming platforms and with what the social media managed to do, is that we are so overwhelmed with stories. The stories are all over the place. I mean, you open the Facebook and stories just keep coming. WhatsApp sharing of the videos, TikTok and others. We are just so overwhelmed with stories that we are no longer able to see the relevance in them, or where do we? It is so hard actually to find an authentic story that will have a positive impact on us. And I must admit that I'm actually much of the book reader, which may sound a bit ironic from the co-founder of the film festival. But I would like to share with you two stories, two books, two novels, which I read, that are talking about the end of civilization. First of them is 1984 by George Orwell, who said that there will be kind of a big brother, somebody who will be denying us access to information until we become blank and easily controlled. And then there's Aldous Huxley, who in his book Brave New World portrayed the future of people who will be having so much access to information that they will no longer be able to pick which one is relevant, and they will lose interest and they will become blank and easily controlled. And looking at the way the way the world is heading currently, I really think that Aldous Huxley was much closer to the truth. And we have so many stories around us that we are no longer able to see which one to go with. And the person who actually summarized it well for me was Neil Postman, who in his book Amusing Ourselves to Death, which I recommend everyone to read, he said that the problem is not that people are laughing without thinking, but the problem is that they don't know what they are laughing about and why they stopped thinking. And I love this quote, and I think there's never been more relevant than in the world of TikTok, who is such an influencer that is far exceeding Facebook and WhatsApp. And so I think what we need to ask ourselves at the end of the day is, what type of stories do we want to create? What type of stories what impact do we want our stories to have? Do we want people to start respecting elderly people again? Then let's create the movies and the stories in which characters respect their grandparents. Do we want to restore a reading culture? Then let's have main characters in the movies reading books, and it doesn't have to be the whole meaning of the story itself. What is sufficient is that the main character, whilst waiting for a friend to pick them up, will read the book. Once we see this more often, once we are exposed to this, we will take it as a reality. It will become the new normal. It will become, the way it is, and this is what we want. So, if we want to portray African culture, let's have African storytellers to do the right thing and portray the Africa the way we want to see it, Africa in which we want to live. And so at the end of my talk here, this is a shout out and appeal to all the script writers, all the producers, all the storytellers, bloggers, all the social media influencers. Let's focus on the world the way we want it to be. Let's create the stories that will guide our future generations into being, the good human beings who respect each other. But then again, we cannot do it alone. Storytellers cannot do it alone. We need platforms that will promote storytellers, and they will make sure that their stories are being heard. So then again, this is a shout out to all platforms such as SoCreative, all creative hubs, all the festivals, and all the storytelling promoters. Create the environment in which storytellers can tell their stories, be the digital fireplace of the 21st century, to make sure that the world will be guided positively through the stories and through your contribution. Thank you.